friends, I want to welcome you to the Help and Hope podcast produced by Mark Inc. Ministries. I'm Sharon Betters, your host, and my guest today is Judy Douglass. And our vision at Mark Inc. is to offer the help and hope of Jesus, especially to those who are hurting and struggling to walk by faith. And one of the ways that we do that is by sharing stories, redemption stories on the Help and Hope podcast. And that is why I am so glad to have Judy with us today, because she has a story to tell, a story of hope and confidence in the grace of God in some of the darkest moments that a parent can experience. Judy is a writer. She is a speaker. She is a podcaster and a prolific writer. I think, Judy, you've written 5 books.
Six
books, editor of magazine for Campus Crusade, 2 magazines, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I can't keep up with everything.
Well, those were long ago.
Okay. Well, they prepared you for this moment, probably,
Yes.
for the ministry you have now. And so she has, by God's grace, touched thousands and thousands of lives across the world. And we are so honored to have her today for the Help and Hope podcast. And we're going to be talking specifically about prodigal children, When You Love a Prodigal. And this is the book that Judy has written. I love it. It is a beautiful devotional 90 days in the wilderness with the parents of prodigals. And as I have looked at the book and read it, I've thought it's like having Judy come and sit with you for a few minutes each day as a mother who is ahead of you in the journey of parenting a prodigal. So I want to encourage you. This conversation is going to be like salty peanuts, because we're just going to touch the surface of what Judy's heart is all about and the message of hope. And this book, When You Love a Prodigal, is going to be a great companion for you in your own journey. So, Judy, welcome to the Help and Hope podcast.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm delighted to be here. One of my favorite topics.
Well, speaking of your favorite topic, why don't you tell us why you know so much about what it means to love a prodigal?
Okay, so a little backstory, because it's a little unusual. So I've been on staff with Cru, Campus Crusade for Christ, for 60 years now. And I was editing magazines, as you said, and married this wonderful man who was also working with Cru and later became president. But we got married, I was 31. And I was so engaged with the magazines, I wasn't in any hurry to have children. So I didn't even have children until I was 36 and 37. And then I figured, that's fine, I'm done. And a few years later, the Lord said, I'm going to send you a son, and you don't need to do anything about it. I went, sure, if you want to do that, you can do that. And time passed, no son. I said, so Lord, about the boy you're sending, no, thank you. I love my children. I'm busy with them. I'm busy with the ministry. I don't really have time for another child at my age. And the Lord said, no, I'm going to send you a son. A few more years passed, and Campus Crusade was moving our headquarters from California to Florida. And the Lord said, when you get to Florida, someone will say, could you take this boy? And I went, if that happens, I will know this is not my imagination. And so 3 weeks after we moved to Florida, I was talking with a new friend, and she said, by the way, do you know someone who could take an 8-year-old boy?
Wow.
And I just went, maybe we could. Tears were running down my face. It was just so bizarre to me. And so we got to know Josh, who was living with his grandparents at the time because he'd been taken from his mother, who was a drug addict, alcoholic, and everything that goes with that lifestyle. And finally, the county decided he wasn't safe with her. And so he was left with the grandparents who were already raising his half sister, who was 6 years older. And they said, we can't do two. We just can't do it.
Mm.
And so they're looking for somebody, because otherwise it goes into the foster care system, and that's not a great place for the most part.
Mm.
And so it took a year with the county before we were approved. It had
Mm.
to do with our travel schedule. And he came to live with us. We'd gotten to know him. We'd had him to our place, and we'd gone to his grandparents, and the girls, my husband was like, if God said to do this, we'll do it. Our girls were like, well, I guess it'd be nice to have a brother.
Mm. Mm.
We were all in such shock when he came, because neither our family or Josh had any clue what it was going to mean to try and meld these families together.
Mm.
For us, well, for him, he couldn't believe that we ate dinner at a table, that we ate every meal, because he didn't all the time. Do you know what people in poverty, what their best source of vegetables often is?
Mm. No.
Ketchup in little packets, because they
Mm.
can get them free.
Yeah.
And I found in his drawer one night a whole group of ketchup packets, because
Wow.
that's what he was used to doing.
Mm.
He couldn't believe he had to go to bed at a certain time, and there were things on TV he couldn't watch. And then when he realized he had to go to school, now he was 2 years behind, because his mother didn't make him go to school very much. And so we ended up having to get tutoring for him to help him catch up. And we did some things to help his brain, because of fetal alcohol syndrome, which came from his mother's drugs and alcohol while carrying him, is really dangerous to the brain. It messes up the frontal lobe, managing your life, but also a lot of other things. And so he just had lots of issues, and he was trying, and we were trying, and we were doing pretty well for a while. And after 3 years of we were foster parents at that time. After 3 years, they invited us to become his parents, to adopt him, because they were terminating his mother's rights.
Mm.
And there's story there too. But and so we were not sure. I mean, I was sure God didn't say, I'm sending you a son for 3 years. And so I was pretty sure we were supposed to. My husband's like, I guess I have so much responsibility in the ministry. Our girls are teenagers. And it was just like, how can we add this? He's such a challenge for us all the time. He was, yeah. So I thought, well, God needs to tell us. And so Steve and I and the girls met, and Michelle, who is now a counselor and started her counseling ministry at about 12, she said, well, I don't really want to keep him, but I
Mm.
don't want to ruin the rest of his life by rejecting him. And we all are like, of course, that's what Michelle would say.
How old was she?
She's 8 months, not even 6 months older than Josh. So she was,
Same age, practically.
yeah, yes, but
Wow.
2 grades ahead, because
Yeah.
he was behind. And yeah, she was 12, and
Wow.
he was not yet 12, but almost. And anyway, so then Steve turns to Debbie. Debbie was very 14, very self-focused, and
Mm.
considered Josh a real nuisance. And so we're thinking, Debbie's going to say, we can't do this, and we're going to have a tie. And what are we going to do? And Debbie said, we just need to suffer gladly. God must have something to teach us, and we should do it.
Oh
And we
my.
all looked and like, who are you?
Wow.
So we said yes and adopted him. And I thought, this will give him the security he's never had.
Mm.
And he knows that we care about him, even if there was, some concerns. And so we adopted him. It was a very special day.
Mm.
And his grandparents were there. And so he started middle school.
Mm.
2 years ahead of older than all the sixth grade boys. And sixth grade boys are shorter than I am.
Right.
And he's already at eighth
Mm.
grade size. Didn't take him long to figure out there is power
Mm.
in size. And he became a bully. He
Mm.
also, because of his brain issues, was a disruption in every classroom. And so he spent most of his first year and a half there in alternative classroom, which he thought was normal.
Mm.
And but he kept getting in trouble at school. He was kicked off the bus, and we were, meeting with the school. We were meeting with a counselor, and sending him to a counselor, trying to get some help, and nothing was making a difference.
Mm.
And the school said, one more incident, he's out of here. So we went looking for what we would do.
Mm.
And God led us to a program here in Orlando called House of Hope. And it's a residential long-term prod program. And they had been a girls program, and they were just opening the boys program. Um, and Josh agreed he needed help.
Mm.
And so he actually went there willingly. And it was a hard but wonderful year and a half that
Mm.
he was there. Because it was local and because it was a requirement, we were very engaged. We had to go to counseling there. We had to go to parents' night. We had to meet with him every Sunday afternoon. We had to sit and be with him and talk to him. Well, that's when we finally began to get a real relationship,
Mm.
because before he was not willing.
Mm.
So the very best, well, one good thing that happened there was they have 1,000 rules. That might be a little exaggeration, and immediate consequences when you didn't
Mm.
follow them. Well, that we just got tired trying to get him to follow our boundaries and rules, but he learned, because the consequences happened over and over and over and over. But
Mm.
the best thing that happened, other than our getting more relationship, was he met Jesus there. His house
Mm.
dad led him to Christ, called us
Mm.
and said, Josh received Christ today, and we baptized him. And my first thought was, why didn't you call us and let us be there? But then I thought, wait, Josh received Christ. And
Mm.
all of a sudden there's this hope welling up that there's hope for him. And the rest of the time he was there, it was he grew. He tried hard to do the program well, and he graduated, and it looked like he was in really a better place. He came home saying, all right, I'm ready to walk with God.
Mm.
Until he ran into his old friends. Oh yeah,
Mm.
he'd joined a gang
Mm.
before. And it just and so what happened was, for the next 15 years, God
Mm.
would bring people into his life, or our influence, and he would want to walk with God, until something else took him back with the friends. And then he was making all sorts of bad choices. There became lots of alcohol, drugs, girls, stealing, a little time in JDC. Eventually, a little later, when he was 18, that he spent a, a couple of nights in jail, and then was on probation for 2 years, which was a gift, because all of a sudden he had
Mm.
a possible negative consequence he couldn't handle, and he was actually pretty good, but not great. So that's what we went through. And yet
Mm.
we were so sure that God sent him to us. And so it's like, all right, we have two major things here. One, how do we help him and not destroy him, in a sense, because
Mm.
he made life hard. And our girls got frustrated with him, and they loved to tell on him, but then he liked to tell on them too. They're
Mm.
all within a 2.5 year period of time.
Mm.
But God was also working in us. And so it wasn't just his need. And so
Mm.
Josh, when we can look back a little better, was an incredible gift to all of us. Our girls would agree. He was a gift. They learned wonderful things. One
Mm.
time, Debbie said, why do you let him get away with so much? And I said, of course, I could have said something to her, but, and I said, Debbie, he's doing stuff almost all the time that's not acceptable. And so I can't be on him every day, all the time. So I've got to choose the most important things. And those are the ones that will save his life because he was at risk. And later, he threatened to take his life several times and once came very close to it. And he texted me to say goodbye. And God enabled me to, through texting for an hour, convince him that he didn't want to do that God still had a plan for him. So that's the backstory. I'm sorry it takes so long, but
That's
I
an
love to
incredible
tell the story.
story.
It was the hardest thing that we'd ever been through, but it was wonderful in the results.
Well, of course, we're on the other side of the story. But I'm thinking of all the things in the meantime, from the beginning until you begin to see that the light shining even more brightly. But how did you know? I mean, were there times where you thought God brought this child to you? It clearly would seem that way because it was supernatural, the way that
It
he
was
came into your
supernatural.
home. Were there times where you thought, did we make a mistake? This is too hard. We
I
can't do
said that a
this.
whole lot of
And
times.
how did you deal with those emotions and those feelings and that desperation?
Well, yes, there were many times because we made mistakes. We we didn't live in a culture with being on staff with a ministry. That's not the people we knew for the most part. So that was different. And Steve knew a little more. His dad was an alcoholic, so that was not as unusual to him. But I many times said, Lord, I think we've made a mistake. Do you have someplace else you'd like to send Josh for somebody who will help him better than we have been able to? And the Lord said, No, no, you are the ones chosen to be Josh's parents and the people who will be faithful to keep loving him and seeking to help him. But just as much as it's important for him, Josh is part of my plan for you because there are areas in your life and Steve's and the girls, all of us, they weren't all the same, that we needed God to do a work. One of my favorite things Jesus said in covering so many things is God is always at work. He's always working in whatever the situation is. And so that became something I held on to because I'd get really frustrated or really scared or feeling like a total failure. And the majority of it fell on me. My husband certainly was there and supportive, but he was also gone a lot. And so it God just kept being there. He's faithful. He says, whatever I give you to do or experience or live through, I'm with you. I don't abandon you. I'm always with you. And and so hang in there. I'm with you. And he was always there. He gave us wisdom. One of the best, sweetest things he did when my husband became president of Crew, which he was for 20 years, Josh was 18. I homeschooled him all through high school because there was no way he was going to make it through school. The person in charge of the homeschool said, I think this is the most creative education I've ever seen. And God just gave us all sorts of creative things that fit within their course requirements. Anyway, now I forgot what I was saying. That happens a lot now. And
I feel your pain.
so my husband was about to be even busier. My girls were away at college, and Josh McDowell, the teacher, preacher, writer that many people have been led to Christ by, came to our door because he's on staff with crew. And he said, Steve, I have a gift for you. I think I'd like to take Josh for a month.
Mm.
Okay. Certainly, that's a great idea. So he went, and it was a month of kind of family vacation for Josh's family. And they had 4 kids. And so he was with them for a month, and they were cleaning out their mountain cabin they had and were going to sell it. And so we had a hard time always getting Josh to work. That just wasn't in his mind at all. And Josh
Mm.
had him working every day, all day, except for the morning when they studied Proverbs together every morning. And
My
so
goodness.
Josh comes home from that month with Josh McDowell,
Mm.
and he says, I really want to be a man of God. And that worked for a while. I mean, he really tried. But then other things would happen.
Mm.
And at one time, I was talking to a friend of my husband's. This man is real an entrepreneur. He starts colleges and things like that. And so he listened to my story, and he said, so he likes to surf because his grandparents had a beach house. And so he used to go surfing all the time there. He loved it. He said, I tell you what, I'm going to send Josh to Southern California. There's a man there who's known as the surfing pastor. And let Josh stay with him for a few weeks and see what
Goodness.
happens. And so Josh goes, and he says, he came home, he says, that's the most fun I've ever had in my life. He surfed, but he also, and he got to teach children how to surf, and he loved it. But he
Mm.
also helped set up the church on Sundays because it was not a full church, it was a surfing church. And he just had a wonderful time. And he came home again and he said the same thing. He says, I want to walk with God. And each time
Mm.
it might last a little longer, but something always grabbed him away. And that's why
Mm.
I called it a 15-year wilderness,
Mm.
because he met Christ when he was 15,
Mm.
but it was before he really and truly settled down and made better choices. It was another 15 years till he was about 30. He got married in there to a girl. Long story, but I'm not going to tell it. And that lasted 7 years. Nobody thought it would. But, and
Mm.
then two, I know I'm not telling other things. I'm just telling my story so far, but you asked it. So here's a major turning point in his life. His grandfather, whom he adored, who'd been the only man in his life in his early years, taught him to fish, took him out on his boat, let him surf, do all this. He loved his grandfather, and his grandfather died. And before he died, Josh told his boss at work, he actually was keeping a job, and he went to his grandparents who lived an hour away from us, and he stayed there for a week. And his grandfather was mostly out, but sometimes he came around.
Mm.
But Josh just talked to him and poured out his heart to him. I don't have any idea what all he said to him, but
Mm.
the main thing he says, I want to make you proud. And so
Mm.
his grandfather's death, we actually thought he would take his life when his grandfather died. He,
Mm.
you know, when his marriage fell apart, that's the time he really came close. And I'm thinking, when his grandfather's gone, I think that's what he'll do. Instead, he says, I want to
Mm.
make Papa proud. And so that was beautiful. And the other thing that happened, he met a girl, a young woman, about that same time. And she said, I'll walk through this with you. And so it was wonderful. They got engaged. And then shortly before their wedding, she said to him another most important thing that was a turning point for him. She said, I can't marry you if you don't quit drinking. She had a 11-year-old daughter. And he said, I can have a few beers. She said, well, I thought you could, but I've seen you can't. And so
Mm.
he quit. He'd been drinking since he was 14 at the maybe earlier, and he quit. And
Mm.
I believe he is now 10 years sober. And they're married. They have, in addition, two little girls, and who are 8 and 4. They're just wonderful. And she has her daughter and live. He's also, my husband used to call him the most creative work avoider he'd ever seen. And now Josh has two jobs. One, he drills water wells. They live out in the country on a little farm, and he takes care of the farm. So basically,
Mm.
he's working almost all the time because the farm work never stops, and his job is hard labor.
Yeah.
And he's a good dad. He
Mm.
still has issues from his past that cause him to get angry about things, but he's growing there too. And so
Mm.
I'll finish that part of the story with this. This morning, in the middle of the night, his grandmother died.
Oh.
She's been alive since, and he has been basically her caregiver. She lived where they were living, and then she had to go into a nursing home because she kept falling. And he brought her to a nursing home 10 minutes from them, and he's been an advocate for her all the time. And he says when they won't take care of her, they hear from me.
Mm.
And he's just been so strong. And so it's been evident that she was ready. She's 99.
Mm.
And she said for years, Lord, can I wake up in heaven, please? And
Mm.
no, I guess Josh still needed to have the responsibility of loving and caring for her. And so the last
Mm.
two weeks, she's been clearly at the end. And they brought in hospice, and the hospice nurses said 2 days ago, says a day or two, and she's going to leave.
Mm.
And he was crying. He's just brokenhearted. He says, she's my last touch with my birth family.
Mm.
And that mattered to him. But
Yeah.
last
Mm.
night he went to see her, and he told her she couldn't hear, she didn't know what he was saying. And he said, I love you, Mimi. I'm going to miss you so much, but I loved having you here. And it's okay if you go home. You don't need to
Mm.
stay for me any longer.
My
And they
goodness.
called him this morning and said that she was gone. And I said, how are you? He said, I'm good. So
Mm.
anyway, that's the whole story, but that doesn't tell you much about this book.
Well, it definitely raises lots of questions about how you came from the beginning to where you are. Clearly a strong faith, but also lots of wrestling and struggling because your subtitle is for your book 90 Days of Grace for the Wilderness. And so walking with a prodigal child as you have done these many years is obviously there are times in the wilderness where it's frightening and you don't know your way and it's scary, and how in the world do you walk through that wilderness? And based on what I've read in your book, it's an inch by inch, little by little, minute by minute, and totally turning to the Lord again and again. One of the things, Judy, that I think about in with having a prodigal child, as you have described, the exhaustion of, first of all, parenting is hard.
For anyone.
Parenting for
Yes.
anyone, for anyone, it doesn't matter if they're the perfect quote unquote child or the rebellious child, the prodigal, but put on top of that the amplified fear, maybe anger, the fighting with the child. You describe some of that, of the emotions that you experience under duress. How did you deal with that kind of exhaustion in your own journey with Josh?
Well, a few years into it, when it was getting harder and harder, I said, okay, Lord, I'm praying a lot, and my husband and friends of ours. I said, but I think I'm going to declare a worldwide prodigal prayer day for Josh. And because we knew staff all over the world, and I knew staff all over the world who had prodigals, because we didn't hide our story. A lot of times people, any people, but people in ministry especially, won't tell what they're going through because they're afraid they won't be able to be in ministry or they'll lose their support, or and so we talked about it so people knew, and that turned out to be a gift for our ministry. But because people could securely talk about the fact what they were struggling with and get help, counseling help, other kinds of help. Sometimes it costs a fortune when you have a prodigal because you are trying to get help for them. And then, but I wrote emails to people I knew with prodigals. And I said, so I'm having a day of prayer for Josh and wanted to ask you to join us. And so we did that for a couple of years, a prodigal day, prayer day for Josh. But the Lord clearly said to me, he says, there are a lot of other prodigals. He said, think you could make the day for any prodigals? I said, I'd love to. And so that began the Worldwide Prodigal Prayer Day for Josh, well, it became the Worldwide Prodigal Prayer Day. And we started what is still going called Prayer for Prodigals, which is a site, a Facebook. Maybe it's just a site. I have so many different things going. I don't remember where everything is. I just go to it on my computer, except for my computer's giving me trouble right now. Anyway, we started it, and we just invited anyone who had a prodigal to come and request prayer for them. And all we ever asked for is first names, but some of them give their names. And so, but they can give us details or not, but we will pray. And so this community began to grow, and it grew and it grew. And every June 2nd, we had a prayer day, but the community's praying for each other all year. So it's not just every June 2nd. June 2nd, by the way, was Josh's spiritual birthday. And that's how I chose the day. But it just grew, and the people giving us names to pray for grew. And we figured nobody wants to turn down prayer for their children, even if they come around. And so unless people asked us to remove a name, we haven't. And we have, as of this year, which we just had the Prodigal Prayer Day, I think there are about 11,000 names that we've been given to pray for. And people around the world do it. And what we do, we still have the Prayer for Prodigals website going, and people still are, and they love, because what happens is people write out their prayers for their requests. And so it's like it's a tangible way that people have joined in with you. And it's not just, okay, well, they said they would pray, but I don't know if they're going to pray. But we encourage people in the community, anybody who finds out about the day of prayer, said, you can pray all by yourself, and that's fine. But we would encourage you to find a few people to get together with. Locally, we've had 2 or 3 different groups. My husband died 2 years ago, and so I haven't been hosting it. And right before that was COVID, so we weren't. So we mostly here done Zoom call prayer times, and they're wonderful because you can put them in small groups. But all over the country, all over the world, people take some time. We encourage them to go through the whole list. Now, a lot of people I'm sure don't, and I haven't finished going through it because this year my oldest grandson was graduating, and the graduation party was right when we were having our prayer time. And so I said, I'll pray through it myself. And I have been little by little, because 11,000 names is a lot of names. But so that's the whole thing that God has done, plus my book. And
first of all, I didn't realize that you had lost your husband, and I'm sorry for
me
that.
too.
I can imagine.
Even Josh prepared me for that. When my husband left, I said, all right, Lord, how am I supposed to live now?
Mm.
Been married 47 years. And he said,
Mm.
I'll be with you. And I said, well, I know that, but how am I supposed to live? And the Lord said, no, Judy, I will be with you
Mm.
every step of the way, just like I was with Josh.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even
Yeah.
there, Josh prepared me for this loss.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing how God does that with you're going through that hard place, and then many years later maybe you realize that that was preparation for another hard place. I really resonate with your the ministry of prayer. I've just been reading some scriptures recently about how Paul, and I'm sure you're very familiar with them, where he asked people to pray specifically for him and for the work that he was doing, and with the help of the Holy Spirit. And just, I don't really understand how prayer works, but I know that something supernatural happens when we pray. God has given us that gift of partnering with him somehow in prayer. And so I'm wondering,
Yes.
Judy, as you were praying for Josh, and of course, these children all over the world, and many more than probably are on the list, what changes would you say took place in your own life? What are some of the changes that took place in your life as a result of praying? Like, you could have thought, oh, I'm praying for Josh and for him to straighten up and fly right, kind of thing, but to keep him safe and all of those incredible needs. But what about for yourself? What happened to you as you began to really understand what prayer was doing in your life?
Well, I did write something in the book called Prayer is a Mystery. And it's talking about what you just said. It's amazing. And I don't God can do it whether or not I pray, but at the same time he seems to say the prayers are necessary. And
Yeah.
and so I learned a lot about praying from praying and
Mm.
from others. In our ministry, we have a huge emphasis on prayer. And so that helped prepare me for following through on
Mhm.
this. But I laughed that some of the best gifts I've ever gotten were from God because of Josh. And so
Mm.
I'll name a few of those. I did learn that just in praying, there are gifts for me. There's some others as well. One, just to be in communication with God and talking to Him. There's a sense of comfort in this hard time. There's a sense of being part of the reality of the world and what can happen there and what God wants to do. And it's not just coming to God and asking. It's coming into fellowship and relationship with God and being part of what He's doing by coming and asking and telling Him how I feel. I learned to be very honest with God. I didn't
Mm.
ever pretend to be know it all or confident that God's going to have to answer my prayer because I'm a strong spiritual person. No, I mean, I come as a needy, weak person and depending on Him. Here are things I got from Him. Um, one of the most important was mercy. One of the things that God said to me early in our relationship, maybe the night that Josh came to Christ, actually, the Lord said, Judy, with this boy, when you make mistakes, and you will, and of course, I'd made plenty of mistakes, He said, make them on the side of grace. And that to me was like, because everybody told me I needed to be so tough with Josh. Yes,
Mm.
I knew I needed, we had some rules, some boundaries, some consequences, but I kept getting this word of you got to be tough with him. You got to threaten him almost, tell him he's going to be out of here. Well, you can't kick them out till they're 18, but I didn't want ever for Josh to be able to say we kicked him out. One time, he and his then girlfriend were leaving. He said, "You're kicking me out." I said, "I am not kicking you out. You have made a choice. You knew the necessity of," he was 19 by this time. Yeah. The necessity of, if you want to live here, you're welcome. We love you. But you need to respect us and our home. And these are some acceptable things and not. And so it's your choice. And so he growled a little. But God showed me also how much mercy he's given me. You know, I can go through and name things I've done in my life and things I still bad attitudes, and I don't do big things wrong very often, but I still fall short of pleasing him or trusting him or treating others as lovingly as I could. And yet God over and over and over has granted me mercy. And he said, "Give mercy to this boy. Give him lots of grace. Remember the wounds of his childhood." No dad showed up. And living with his mom and her lifestyle, there were men around all the time. And he was abused and he was neglected, and she'd just get drunk and leave. And the neighbors, they were in a little trailer that his grandfather set them up in. And the neighbors would have to call and say, "You better come get the boy. She's gone again." And so he has abandonment issues, you know, major, and neglect and abuse and those kinds of things. And so there's not a surprise that he struggles and makes some wrong choices and is not sure what he wants to do or be. And so you really need to give him a lot of grace and a lot of mercy. Yes, he needs to learn and grow, but he needs you to show him the love and grace and mercy that God has for him, so that he can trust God, because he learned to trust you. Another thing that I got in prayer, I'd call it freedom, the sense that I can come and tell him everything and be honest, and yet at the same time have this peace that God's heard it, he knows all the needs, he's got a plan. And so that saves me from the despair or panic or worry that could eat me up. And just learning that God is willing. He's not going to quit, even though it looks like it sometimes. Another thing, these are prayer gifts. See, this is this chapter right here, prayer gifts. And so I'm just sharing some of them. Another one is courage. Well, first of all, that God gave me the courage to say yes in the beginning. But more than that, just courage to keep not giving up on Josh. He would disappear sometimes and I didn't know where he was. He came after my husband with a hammer one time because he was high, and he wouldn't let him go to drive his car. And so he was going to come after him. Those are some. Let me see what else is on the next page, because I don't remember it all. Oh, yeah. Just one of the most important things I learned, and I learned it throughout my life, but Josh was the big teacher, was giving thanks in all things. Giving thanks, giving thanks, giving thanks. It has become my most consistent practice, probably, and no matter what's happening. And so last night I gave a message at our we go to a house church, a small church, and I was working on my message, and I have this brand new computer, and I hate getting a brand new computer because it doesn't ever work right, because they have to match up things from the past with things from now. And so I just was having so much trouble writing out my message. I mean, it was one letter, a next letter, a next letter, not words, letters. And then it wouldn't let me save something so I could send it to somebody because it wouldn't connect to my printer. Anyway, I was pretty frustrated. And I said, all right, thank you, Lord. You know what I need to say, and you know how I need to have it. I learned that from Josh. That's such a gift because I had to say thank you over and over and over to be able to keep moving and do the next thing that needed to be done. And now I still see it helping me day after day after day. You know, there's hardly a day goes by. There's not something that's an irritant or my body doesn't work right or I'm so grateful that Josh was my teacher to become a thankful person. And it's one of the main messages I give now when I get to speak and share with people is give thanks, give thanks. So those are some of them. I could name lots more. You know, I learned to put on the armor and not try to go into prayer on my own. And to know, I also know that we have an enemy and that I don't ignore that in my prayers. I pray prayers to banish the enemy, to stop him, the things that God has taught us to do, to be able to stand and have the shield of faith and all the parts of the armor that we're going to need. And when you're with a prodigal or other things that pull you into enemy territory, so to speak, it's real important that you're wearing the armor. And I also, one of my favorite sayings is, the work of God is done on our knees, and then we go see what happened. And so those are, I knew how to pray, but Josh made it moment by moment real for me. So.
Judy, I really appreciate you sharing those. I call them treasures in the darkness. Isaiah 45, where he says, I'll give you treasures in the darkness, riches stored in secret places, so that you will know I am the Lord your God, the one who calls you by name. And that's what I see he did with Josh's life with you, sending you so many incredible treasures that were designed to turn your heart toward Jesus. There's many times you're praying for your son's heart to be turned toward Jesus, and God was saying, well, let's talk about your heart first. And I appreciate so much what you shared. And I think that for anyone who is listening who is struggling, I always like to have my guests encourage that person. But I think you have done that with the treasures that you have shared with us about prayer and what a critical part of raising a prodigal and loving a prodigal prayer is, what a gift it is that God has given to us. So, friends, I'm Sharon Betters, and you have been listening to the Help and Hope podcast produced by Mark Inc. Ministries, and my guest is Judy Douglass, and Judy has written this wonderful book called When You Love a Prodigal. I just can't recommend it enough. 90 days of grace for the wilderness. And as I said at the beginning of our conversation, having this book next to you is like having Judy sit next to you for a few minutes each day as someone further ahead of you in the journey of loving a prodigal and calling back and saying that God is sovereign and you can trust him. And so, Judy, thank you so much for joining us today. Judy has written other books, and you can find her at judydouglass.com. That's her website, judydouglass.com.
2 S's on Douglass.
She has started a prayer ministry for prodigals across the world, even having June 2nd as a special day of prayer for prodigals. So make sure you stop by her website to check that out. As I always like to say, our conversations are like salty peanuts. They're just touching the surface of incredible, deep truths. And that's what we've done today. And so I hope that you will say, I need to know more. I want to know more of this journey of loving a prodigal. Check out Judy's book, as I said. And make sure you go to markinc.org, 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 where you're going to find lots of free resources that are designed to help turn your heart toward Jesus. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to being with you again.